بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Her Excellency Sheikha Hind bint Hamad Al Thani, Vice Chairperson and CEO of Qatar Foundation, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Abdurrahman Hamad Al-Mana. I'm a graduate of Cornell University's Urban and Regional Studies program and a city planner working at the Ministry of Municipality. As an urbanist myself, I am incredibly excited to be a part of this session. Urban planning and architecture play an important role as they shape the built environment in which people live, work, and play. What does the perfect town, city, or neighborhood even look like? And how can it be designed with building a community in mind? This is what we will explore in today's session with our distinguished guest, Mr. Léon Krier, one of the world's leading figures in architecture and urbanism, who will share his perspective about creating urban environments that are rooted in classical architectural traditions and principles. Without further ado, please give a warm round of applause to welcome Mr. Léon Krier.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to be here. I've never participated in a lecture which has been so ceremonially and elegantly organized in my life. We have been in the trenches almost most of my life, but we see now that as events are developing, there are now suddenly very many people who realize that the civilization, the machine civilization, that machinism, modernism, will not survive, that its days are counted. And the problem is how to survive this collapse of machine civilization without too much damage and elegantly. And there are very few, one speaks of America being the greatest country, the United States being the greatest country in the world because it's a political system where not man, but laws reign. The problem is, what about the situation when laws are not really as good as they are supposed to be? When regulations are wrong? Clearly, you need individuals, you need men or women to do something about it. And one of the main problems of what's happening to our cities today is regulations. It's not anarchy of the market. It's actually regulations which lead even intelligent people, even gifted people, even sensitive people and sensible people to do the wrong thing at a scale which has never been seen on this planet. There have been a few individuals who have been countering this phenomenon, which was clear from the beginning that something went wrong. And it's those individuals which are now our mainstay, in this our main references. And one of these people is in this room and he's alive. His master, Hassan Fatih, was really a person, if he had been listened to when he was active in Egypt, and he was even renowned worldwide, when he would have been listened to, we wouldn't be in this situation. You had people like that in England, you had one or two in France, you had one or two in Germany, and some in America. And it is those people who now seem to have been right. And there was a theory which has been evolved from these people, which developed from these single individuals, which has been decisive and which I think shows the way to the future. When I proposed Abdel Wahid al-Wakil to be the chief architect of the project, I was master planning for His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales in 1988. The Prince's Council said, why? Why this foreigner? Why an Egyptian? I said, because he's the best. We have nothing like that in England, the United States, anywhere. Hassan Fatih. So we need somebody who is really able to do what the Prince of Wales has envisioned or has asked me to really realize. And so we need the best. And they said, but why an Arab? Because he only knows how to do Islamic architecture. I said, no. A great architect like him is polyglot. Means that he speaks any language. And the great thing about people who speak, you know, a Chinese who tries to speak English or an Englishman who tries to speak Chinese, there's always something where you see where he was born or where he comes from. Whereas a great architect, he can speak a foreign language without accent and to perfection. So that was it. But they shook their heads and it was impossible to do that. Now, why would that be this way? Is that traditional architecture is not a thing of the past. And when we do traditional architecture today, we do not revive the past. We use a technology which by definition is atemporal, is not from yesterday or tomorrow, but is something which works today and has been working in the past. So this is technology, this traditional architecture, which is defined, the character and the quality is largely influenced by climate, the soil, and altitude. You have these three qualities in every country on this planet. And that is why the architectures of the mountains, of the plains, of hot and cold climate, of sandy soil or stony soil, is very different. Then you have this phenomenon coming with industrialization and the large-scale use of fossil fuel, meaning that you have an external energy, not purely human energy, to do not use natural materials which you find on the ground where you are building, but you mine or you extract and then through machine processes an addition of or consumption of enormous amounts of energy, basically fossil fuel or whatever you call it. I mean, it's either coal or gas or petrol. People now contest that it's fossils. We don't know. But anyway, we call it fossil fuel. Now, without fossil fuel energies, you can't do this kind of architecture. You all know Villa Savoye of Le Corbusier, but when Le Corbusier builds Villa Savoye in India, it will be the same building. When Rem Koolhaas builds, it's interesting that this is the only building of Rem Koolhaas which I find has something of the locality here. Otherwise, you can't take his Chinese buildings, put them to London, it doesn't make any difference. Anyway, so not only are these buildings now, the modernist buildings which are children and products of fossil fuel, are they indifferentiated through the climate, through altitude and soil, but they can only function with heavy machinery, again, using electricity, but which is a product of fossil fuels, in order to maintain them in a workable order in the given climate where you, I mean, the glass skyscrapers which you put here don't really belong to any climate, neither to Siberia or to the desert. So you need machinery to make them humanly workable and usable. And that's the situation where we are in. Now that is when these people who adopted this ideology, because it's not just a technology, but it's an ideology which is a technology which comes with a technology, with an ideology. And it is that ideology which now dominates education. That's why I'm very pleased to be in a place which is about education. Because once you understand these concepts, you can then choose. And that is what is wrong about, there's nothing wrong about modernism if it's a choice. But if you present it as an ideology, an absolute, then it's a mistake. Now, I say that even these depend on fossil fuel, and therefore it won't survive the next century, maybe even shorter, because it's very clear now that the extreme violence, which is now exploding in the world, is due how to safeguard the reserves of fossil fuels for certain countries or certain groups of countries. Who is going to use them and for how long? But is that, I say that even if we had an infinite source of fossil fuel, if they were falling from heaven like rain, we should still return to traditional technology of building, to the use of building materials, of local building materials. Because it's them which, through the handling of human hands, ensures a character, scale, and correct attitude to climate. So this is a problem. The car or the machinery, they are not a problem if they are used wisely. But if we must use them to do anything every day, that is where the problem lies. They have to be a choice, not an obligation, not a daily obligation. And I think one of the most important books to read is written by James Howard Kunstler. It's called The Long Emergency. Some people I know here know it. But the main lesson of that book is that it took 200 years to go from the discovery of coal, the exploitation of coal, and petrol and gas will reach a peak in exploitation and use. And then many people, when you talked about this 30 years ago, people say, oh, but you know, there will be fossil fuel forever. The Club of Rome has been warning about, they have been wrong about everything and so on. No, because the relevant thing is not for how long it will last, but that once we reach the oil peak, then the way down will be catastrophic. And I think the wars we have now are due to this collapse, unbelievably violent planetary collapse of political and human relations. And that is also why this collapse coincided with the minimum absolute of traditional architecture, and which will grow from now on again, and the maximum of modernist experiments, which from now on will become very, very rare and very, very expensive. So there is hope. And we saw it in this country. There is Mr. El-Wakil, and there are the great spirits here, which represent individuals in institutional and in more important roles, which can reverse this fate, which so far has been a fate. And I think that we visited yesterday this Lusai, I think it's called Lusai Heritage Site, which is an unbelievable, it's a monumental achievement. It's very modest buildings, but they are extremely relevant. They are the best illustration of what I have been talking about. Technologically, formally, scale-wise, character-wise, it's a perfect model of what should be done in the future. I grew up in this environment. I went to school in this town, small town, and this looks nice, isn't it? It's a charming, beautiful buildings, very large basilica, a monastery. This is part of the monastery where we went to school. And this is modern architecture. All that was rebuilt after 1946 because the American artillery confronting the German Siegfried Line on the other side of the river destroyed the town. And in late 70s, when I found out that all this was new, I tried to make a book about this, to publish a book about it. I went to see different architects and planners who were involved, and they said, no, we don't want this old. Go to see the German embassy, it's all in concrete. No, horrible buildings. They were ashamed because they had done this beautiful work. And for me, that was a demonstration that modernism is not an affair of modernity. It's very different from modernism, that modernity is a fact. We are all modern, whatever we do, whether we believe in God or we are atheists, we are modern. Whether you are right or wrong, you are modern. But modernism is an ideological position and a choice which one can refuse because it will turn out to be wrong. So I learned, can you imagine, this building was completely collapsed. It's all built in 1950, and the basilica. When I found this out, I had left university after 2 terms because there was nothing to learn. Whenever I did anything resembling a traditional building, the professor said, you can't do this. And when I investigated, why can't I do this? He would say, we did this in the Third Reich. So I said, but you have been also working, eating in the Third Reich. Have you stopped eating? You have been playing the piano? No. So why architecture? Why should architecture be guilty for the crime of the Nazis? It's ridiculous. So I left, and I worked for, I found out I respected an English architect called James Stirling, who had done one building, which I thought was fantastic. And he accepted me, but I found out that even he, James Stirling, was then the best known architect in the world, like Foster today. He didn't know anything about architecture. When he saw me doing this, he said, how do you dare do that? I would never dare doing this. Putting roofs on people. I said, but it's raining, so roofs here are very good. They're useful. It's a technological device. It's high tech against wind and rain. So I did many mistakes, but on this village, which I loved and which had been rebuilt, my lovely grandparents lived there. So architecture, when you see somebody doing beautiful architecture, like El-Wakil, or like Muhammad Ali Abel, they are lovers of architecture. Everything they do is a love affair because you have enormous pleasure doing this kind of work. So that is where I grew up. It was a perfect town in Luxembourg when I grew up, and now even the Chinese love it so much that they rebuilt this quarter in the Huawei campus. I had to correct the roof a little because it was a bit too. But it shows that, you know, this is a language which is universal and people just love it when it's beautiful. People love beauty and they don't like when it's ugly. This is where I grew up, on a beautiful promenade overlooking, past this beautiful building, overlooking a valley. My father sold the house in 1970, and now it looks like that. When I saw this happening, I felt like I'm levitating. I'm no longer human. I lost my north, they say. J'ai perdu mon nord. And I thought, it's time to do something about it. And I developed my theory of traditional urbanism based on the experience where I had grown up. And the great thing about Luxembourg was that the historic center, here, and the suburb, the beautiful suburb, we saw I grew up on this boulevard. Those two, they are perfect small towns by themselves. People work there, they go to church there, they go to school there. I went to all these things. We had a garden behind the house, enough vegetables for a family of 6. And those were the models for independent, that urban quarters must be like a town in the town. You take your car if you want to have a picnic out in the country or if you want to go on holidays, but you don't need to do it. I went to school from year 1, from year 3 to year 18, all on foot, to the primary school, secondary school, and so on. No problem. And the luck was that these quarters are separate by deep valleys, by deep canyons, and this was the city walls, which were replaced by a park. So when I lived in Berlin, and I got newspaper from Luxembourg saying that park or parking, that the administration, which was changing the town into a business district, this no longer was a town but became business district with government, that they were going to cut down the trees and make a big parking. So not park, but parking. So I had another levitating thing happening to me. And I started to write about it and to develop my theory, which became later the main theory of in the United States of new urbanism, is that large towns are a family of small towns. And there are links, of course, in between. There are different characters and different functions. Some are more for education, some more for industry, some more for... But they are always independent communal units. And that is why the European Quarter, which developed on this hill, was being developed as an American campus of separate buildings, a skyscraper, a ground scraper, gigantic buildings. I did a counter project, how to integrate those institutions, the parliament and the administration and the Centre Monnaie and the International Monetary Fund, how to complete that quarter, maintaining those buildings and the International Justice Court, but making a town which would not be bigger than the historic town. And that, that got a lot of publication. I was nearly appointed for the new architect for the European quarters, but then there was too much opposition, and I don't care. If they want to do it, for me it doesn't. If they want to suffer more, I don't care. I'm ready to do nice work, you know, if they want to participate. I lived in England, and it was the Prince of Wales who discovered actually these publications, and who agreed with it, because they are not my theories. They are the theories of what traditional towns had to work in the past, because otherwise it doesn't work. It's based on human scale, on human motricity. And the human motricity, regular, customary motricity, is defined by the measure of our legs, grown-up legs. It's great. I mean, they really work. They still work. And it's better to work in nice town, to walk in nice town than on nice car park, you know, because at least you can enjoy things. So instead of promoting more of this acentric or monocentric megapolis, a large town has to be like a family of small towns. Instead of being an explosive radio-concentric body with a business center and enormous suburbs, you then, you know, when you think how to reorganize territory, it's a very radical process. And we have models of the past. Paris was actually organized that way under Napoleon III to be a 3 million people town within what is now the peripheric, 3 million residents or users. They live in 20 arrondissements, which each arrondissement is divided into 4 quarters, quartiers. 4 quarters, and each one has the size of these traditional towns. And it's a formidable system, which was then developed by Otto Wagner in Vienna into a theory, and particularly by a man called Eliel Saarinen, who was a Finnish architect who traveled to America. His son became very famous, but Eliel Saarinen was an urbanistic genius who defined, he wrote a book called The City of Man, I think, where he talks about these quarters, urban quarters, as functional communities, which was misunderstanding. He tries to play a bit modernist, but meaning that all the functions of daily and weekly and maybe even some monthly life is happening with these, and I developed this into a complete theory of architecture. So this is a reality now. You know, you have excessive height of buildings in the center and excessively low buildings in the suburbs. These are for business and these are just for the rest. You know. And it takes hours to get from one place to the other, and it needs a gigantic army to maintain this, to keep robbing the petrols you need, which you don't have under your own ground, and the uranium. So that system is now collapsing. We talk about this suburbia as sprawl, but this is equally sprawl, because it's monofunctional. These are all offices, and these are all residential and other things. These are organized in cul-de-sacs. Cul-de-sac, is that known here? Yeah, it's cul-de-sac. And these are vertical cul-de-sacs. And that is what needs to be reformed. So now, I think once the theory is known, it becomes a matter of intellectual choice. And then if it's an intellectual choice, it has to become also an individual and a political choice. That we can't afford this as an obligatory system, so we have to use that motricity, which is good for health, and good for society, and good for community, and good for maintaining an orderly and pleasant society. These are minimal movements every day, and these are maximum unaffordable movements. Unfortunately, the World Climate Conference doesn't talk about this. They begin to. But it's that the main issue which needs to be solved. We can't do anything about the climate. I mean, to think that we can change the climate or maintain the climate in a way our few scientists define is a fantasy. It's another hubris, I think. So we have to go back towards this system of unity rather than disunity and conflict. Nature works through cellular multiplication. You have a mother cell which multiplies and becomes, and each of these cells have an individual life, but they form individual beings. Whereas this cell which explodes in metastatic and completely uncontrollable sizes, we call cancer. And these hypertrophies are cancers. And so it's as if families no longer grew by multiplication, but by exploding their size. And all serious scientists, from Plato to Galileo, and you have your scientists, talked about the specific shape of every individual being, plant, or animal. You can't grow horses 100 meters high. They collapse, at least on this planet, and maybe on another planet that's possible. So we have cities took many, many centuries to develop as a model. And large cities then grew by duplication or multiplication, whereas we overgrow horizontally or vertically. So if I was a dictator and I could make one law, I would say, thou shalt not build higher than 3 floors. 100 steps, because that is what is comfortable to walk. You can still have lift, but use it when you please, not because you are obliged to. And so that system now has been experimented worldwide, and I don't think we need any more experiments of this kind. It's just, it has reached its limits, its Baroque and Rococo stage. So we have to use again the system of large cities being polycentric, and that's the term, polycentricity and limited height. And then, I mean, let these go their way. And the difficulty is reading what these organic creations of the past were like, because in the 19th century they were so overcharged, overdeveloped, and excessively densified, that the original structure is very difficult to find. But we have researched it, we have measured it, and we now know it. Therefore, we can implement it. And this kind of thing needs to be reformed. But reforming an existing diseased body, misconstructed body, is extremely complicated. What is much easier, and what is very easy, to do the right thing anew. And that is why the Prince of Wales started to be interested in urbanism, and why we tried to build a model how this should be done. Because modernism essentially works by 3 building types: the house, the skyscraper, and the landscraper. Excessively tall, excessively large, And they are machines to maintain and expand the machine civilization, whereas traditional urbanism works by human hand. And it's the hand and spirit which formed craft cultures which we all, and of which the Lusai experiment, and even your beautiful, the souk el-Waqif, is a fantastic example. I was really surprised, I didn't expect this. That to have done that so well nowadays, it's unbelievably difficult to do traditional architecture today well, like Mr. El-Wakil, is an unbelievable effort because the system goes against it. The technology, the administration, the spirit of the rulers generally. So you need single individuals in the ruling class and also in the competent, in construction competence who do this. But it's a heroic effort. You see this explosion of scale. If that is traditional Paris, that was 19th century, you had already in Berlin, you had these excessively large blocks which are already based on mass circulation. And then Corbusier's fantasies, all at the same scale. Huh? And look at this Albert Speer's main axis, it's almost human compared to the monsters which were created after. And it has also to do with land use. For instance, the traditional town, European, let's say traditional town, but you would find the same here. You would find the same in Persia or in Egypt, is that society is very complex, and it lives by having, towns live by having extremely differentiated sizes of building lots. Large, medium, small, and so on. And it's the composition of all this together around a pleasant, beautiful urban space, like you have here in the souk, el-Waqif, that makes it a town. It's the magic of these different uses and symbolic meanings which make a town. When you have, instead of modern civilization, the most decadent form of capitalism, you have gigantic, or communism, you have gigantic pieces of land which are much bigger than an original town, just for one use, just for either democratic housing, suburban housing, or socialist housing, but it's always suburban, it's not urban. I've got a bit too much to go through, so I will speed up now. But this to give you a last shock of scale. This is the most beautiful town in Germany, which was bombed by the flying fortresses, Dresden, all burned down. That is old Dresden at the same scale with Volkswagen factory, Krupp factories, a French, I think this is a French factory, Renault factory, and so on. World exhibition in Chicago. And this is the death camps of Auschwitz and the industrial yard of IG Farben in Auschwitz. Can you see what machine scale does to human beings, not only to the victims, but also to the perpetrators? You know? And it's that kind of scale we have to deal with. Whereas this is a comparison of traditional town centers like Luxembourg, Bern, Munich, I think I got now, but through different cultures, and an important African town, Gardaya, in Nigeria, which shows, no, these are human legs are not that different from continent to continent, or from culture to culture, and it's those we have to go back to. And this is when I argue to integrate modern industry in traditional towns. This is the most advanced development, business and industrial research park, Stockley Park, next to Heathrow Airport in England. And look at the sizes. These buildings, they don't pollute, they are not noisy, they can be easily integrated in any of these urban quarters. There is no reason not to integrate modern administration or production, even production in towns. You just need to have the right site. This is the kind of cul-de-sac situation of suburbs, and generally gated, and with that you can't build a society. You will end up by having a society which explodes, and this is the grid. Whether it's organic or whether it's Euclidean geometry, it doesn't really matter. it's the interconnectedness. And that is sort of the image of a traditional town when the economy would be in the simple blocks and residential blocks and production and craftsmanship, whereas these are the symbolic representation, and it's the marriage of both which makes the incredible magic and power of traditional towns. You have very interesting representation of that difference, integration of institutions with towns in tourist maps. Now you have always, the institutions are represented in 3 dimensions, whether it's here your mosque or your Louvre or whatever it is, and the more common buildings are in 2 dimensions. And it's the expression, the difference in silhouette of this economic fabric, this civic fabric, and institutional representation, which makes the interesting silhouettes of traditional towns. You need which we call in architecture, we call that classical architecture or monumental architecture, and vernacular building, which is a simple building craft, which is, as I explained, the technology of building. And this is not just pure technology, it's also an art of turning a purely building technology into an art form. And why should there be art for public buildings? Because they are bigger, they represent community, not just individuals or family, and therefore they have to be read not only beautifully from close, but also from far, and that needs a different articulation. If you take a stable and blow this up, if you blow this up 5 times, it will look gross. If you reduce this in scale to a house, it will look ridiculous. But it's the differentiation of symbolic artistic language and technological, tectonic, constructive language, which makes the powerful dialectic or dialogue of public architecture. There are different forms of creating public space. I think we have to hurry. How much time do I have left? No. For instance, Andres Duane, who is famous, greatly appreciated architect in America, one of the founders of New Urban, sent me this. What do you think of this? In 2 minutes, I cut this with a knife and send it back. This is more interesting. Same architecture. And that's the point. Architecture should be Euclidean because it's easier, once you form your stone or your brick or your bed is basically rectangular. Frank Lloyd Wright tried to have hexagonal or oval beds. They never work. I mean, it's too expensive. Well, that is when the Prince of Wales commissioned me to become the master planner of his town project. It took more than 5 years to get this done because the palace was against it. They said, yes, Your Highness, great idea, will do, and so on. But then they made it impossible. The administration, the palace, everything was against it for 5 years. They thought I wouldn't survive because they thought I am Jewish, I have a strange English accent, he is not going to survive. Of that group of people who were involved, started in 1988, I am the only survivor. And of course, Prince of Wales has become His Majesty the King. And the project is now building in its last phase, and I think most people who go there think that he's a great man because he has done something which was unthinkable. This is a drawing which I didn't, which Mr. El Wakil's watercolorist colored in, and we started with this first phase. And if El Wakil had been the chief architect, this would not only be great urbanism and modest architecture, but it would be an absolute masterpiece in every sense. Unfortunately, we tried ever since to do something together, but the world is not yet for that sort of experiment. Now most of it is built. Now they agree the tower, yes. I was threatened to resign. I couldn't design the tower myself. But now, because why do you want the tower? Landscape impact, terrible. I said, bloody hell, we want to be seen. Tall buildings are public buildings which need to be seen from afar, because vertical buildings make an accent to situate a main square. So it's very important to have also a readable, understandable silhouette, not only a beautiful plan. So that is Old Dorchester. This, the Prince of Wales land, was all this. For a century, the palace sold land to this small town, which is actually the size of our quarters, about 33 hectares, and built suburbs. And the prince said, no more suburbs. We're going to build a real town. And that's why I became a master planner. So instead of the town being monocentric, it becomes polycentric. To do this kind of town, you need that amount of land to build a town. To do a suburban town, you need that amount of land per person. No. So it's not that difficult to calculate what effect that has on the planet. So polycentric, 4 different quarters. Every quarter has a readable and walkable edge. 1, 2, 3, and the first one was supposed to be the model. So not only does it have a walkable and a readable edge, but it must be walkable and drivable, so that you experience, once you use it, you know how that town operates. You don't need a plan. You don't need way signs. So that was the first experiment. The only thing missing is a tower. It was a battle you cannot imagine. And so there's not only promenades, and we don't have sidewalks. You can drive, and because by not having sidewalks, cars drive very carefully. People say, why don't you have sidewalks? I said, we do. We plan towns like a car park. Have you ever had a problem walking in the car park? Nobody drives crazy in a car park, because you know that somebody will step out and walk in the middle of your driveway. And that's how we build our towns. So we don't have sidewalks when we can help it. You have a readable, beautiful edge, and you can walk it, and then also a faster road on the outside of the quarter. You have each of these quarters is linked by a high street, which is the main street, where you encounter the most important buildings, and also shops and retail. And the 1, 2, 3, 4 local piazzas are linked, are no longer than 5 minutes walk to the main center of the whole town. So it's a logic which is, once you use it, you don't need explanation. The streets are not the one building type repeat ad infinitum, but you have many different building lots of different sizes with different houses, house types, or same house type but different sizes, some of them set back. So you have trees of a garden even adorning the public space. Cars are parked in the back, either on surface or in the garages. And then in the garages, above the garages, you have even a room for granier and so on. So that is now the townscape, the streetscape. And you know that this is a most important street because it's focused on on the main tower. This is done by, in the beginning it was very difficult because we didn't find the real, after El Wakil had been refused, we didn't have the right architects to do these kind of things. So I had to do endless corrections every day. The chimneys are too small, the windows are the wrong way around. Now we have fantastic architects, George Somerset Smith and Ben Pentreath, who now employ each about 50 people. So they have grown from being students when we started, and they are now major architects in United Kingdom. And they do beautiful buildings. Some of them have, even on low buildings, you have penthouses. Why do you want penthouses? Because they are the best way to live. Once you are on the roof, you are like whether you are in New York, above 50 stories, but here, when you are above 2 stories, it's fantastic, it's the same feeling. You are like in the landscape. That is the employment. All these black are employment. Large buildings are on the outside. These are chocolate factories or whatever. High tech, a lot of high tech industries. And these are the traffic hierarchy. So fast traffic, most fast traffic outside, and then inside it's mixed traffic, very few sidewalks and so on. And it's this not having sidewalks which regulates speed naturally, without signposts. We don't have signposts. One of the nice, extraordinary things also in this country is that you have road signs are sometimes decorative, which is fantastic. I think it is extraordinary. This is the footprint of the whole of Dorchester with Poundbury. And it shows much greater density, and also particularly density, a variety of buildings rather than a monotony of buildings. Here only schools were different from the residences. And this to show that the modern towns have all shops in the center, all business parks outside, or suburban malls. Here you have small buildings around the central square, and then the largest buildings are on the edge, next to the roads where you need maybe lorries. And there you see the enormous variety of building lots, which allows then, it's the groundwork to allow architectural variety justifiably. It's not architectural variety because the architect felt like making interesting variety, but because by nature, typologically, you produce variety. So you don't need buildings, a house to look like a castle, and the castle to look like a church, and the museum to look like a factory. So instead of zoning, so we still have zoning, but we have it lot-wise, and we refuse to have large agglomerations of the same function, but they are checkerboard, distributed in a checkerboard. And our zoning plan is always polychromatic. The parking is in the center, the English Muse system, which we use systematically. And there you have the variety of building lots forming good public space, whereas here you have extremely large, that would be the modernist system, extremely large building lots for single function and single type of buildings, single type of use, and which virtually creates obligatory boredom and obligatory uniformity. And so on. That's the tower missing this. This is one of the central squares. That, to get that building done was like a battle for 4 years. Even the people who supported me said, give up, you'll never do it. That was a Roman road, straight as narrow, and that building sits now on the Roman road because it's the building which dominates the local square. Because if you have straight lines, you need very good architecture. If you have these broken geometries, natural geometries, you can have very modest architecture without ever becoming boring. So these are very simple but elegant. And then this was the main tower, which I nearly lost my shirt over. And my only honor, instead of having this beautiful piano room on the tower, my only honor left was to be able to appoint the architect rather than have somebody else imposed. That's the main square. The only thing I could design, was allowed to design, was the plinth for Queen Mother monument on the square. And the engineer imposed in this massive stone construction a concrete pillar, because he said, what? I said, we don't need concrete. This full stone, Portland stone, which is 20 miles away from us. But if a lorry drives into it, I said, we'll rebuild it. But if you want to take down the statue, we need to bolt it to a steel plate which must be fixed on a concrete pillar. I said, we don't plan a revolution. So he wouldn't sign the permit. So we still have concrete somewhere. And some of these buildings are, in fact, steel construction with solid outside wall. So that was at least that the outside wall is a solid tectonic a self-supporting wall, even whatever your junk you put inside. So we are not able to be as heroic as Abdelwahab, who does really extraordinary, fully consistent traditional building. It's very compromised. But there are also, these are now the last stages. I don't need to do corrections anymore because we got the right craftsmen, we got the right bricklayers. The only thing which is not good is the steelworks. This is a roundabout which is not yet built. So a very important regulation is to have, instead of having metric height limits, saying we will allow 24 meters or 48 meters or 12 meters. I say no metric limitation, but limit the number of floors. If you have 5 floors, build any height. You know, the Campanile in Florence, 100 meters high, the Giotto Campanile, 100 meters high, it has 5 floors. Whereas when you allow any height, there's no romantic, dramatic, monumental ceilings in most Chicago skyscrapers. They are very boringly low, very disappointing. Ms. van der Rohe, have you been inside? It's depressing. So it's that simple regulation. Now, why I am against utilitarian high-rise? Because they are toxic building forms. When you build a great town, it's a machine for producing value, for increasing the value of your initial investment, for making incredible returns, and for generations. But that attracts then other investors who want just to, are not interested in making the town, but they want to make money, and they buy a small lot and build a skyscraper, make a lot of income. There is no future in that, because once everybody will have a skyscraper, there's nothing interesting about having a crowd of skyscrapers, because, you know, have you been to Hong Kong? You see what happens. You live like at the stone throw from the next window. So I think 3-story high limit is about right, because, you know, you can build this with 3 stories. It's actually no story. You can build that without story. That is 1 story, and this is 3 stories. So anything in the world can be realized within this. And interestingly, the most radical people in the United States have found out. I'm the master planner for the new University of Austin, Texas, which is funded by Peter Thiel and Joe Lansdale and the people from Silicon Valley. So there is hope, because when these people discover it, meaning that it really works, or a project in south of England. So they are now, and I finish with this, when President Trump had General Soleimani killed in Iran, and he said that we are going to destroy historical heritage in Iran if they don't behave. My main partner, Jamshid Seperi, is Iranian, but he lives in Washington. We said we need to make a gift to Iran for the Revolutionary Guards to build finally the right thing, because if they destroy your beautiful towns, you need something to replace. So we did an ideal project, which would be for one of the Tund Islands in the Straits of Hormuz, a little tomb, I think a minor tomb, and it's about 1 square kilometer, just above 1 square kilometer. The landing strip is about 1 kilometer long, and we have 3 towns. Therefore, it's called Sepolis, which means Tripolis. 1, 2, 3, and a research center. And you have enough agricultural, horticultural land in the middle to nourish most of these. So it would be to have like a university town or a research, an experimental town, which could be an exhibition where all the crafts, all the industries, all the manual industries which the country, how it survived centuries and millennia before, will again re-establish as a main source of production and activity. Because people, human beings, babies, are still born with the same old talents they got in the past. You just need to train them, to educate them, as you do here in the education city. To educate them to do what they are good at. Don't make them do things they don't like. Because work must be a love story. Otherwise it's slavery. And so very quickly, this has all the, these are the, just to give you an idea, these incredible agricultural buildings which are in the agricultural areas. And even an attractive airport in the airfield with bomb shelters under it. Very useful for Iran. And you can land in these fantastic buildings. Great, you know, like you have this umbracolo, you know, the big, in Barcelona and in San Diego, you have this, it's not a glass house, it's not a conservatory, it's not a palm house, but it's purely done with lattice to make shade. So that would be an ideal to shade the planes. And we have very large, this was very large also an architecture inspired by Oman and by what you have here and by Azir and particularly about Yemen, a region. Shabim was one of the, Shabim is very interesting because you have this, what looks like skyscrapers, but they're only 5 stories. They have 2 windows, one above the other, and therefore they seem like 10-story skyscrapers. Main square. And you have mosques, and you have even a very complex program, buildings dedicated to poets and the traditional crafts and traditional sports activities. But there's even, there's mosque in every quarter, but also there's a synagogue and a Christian church, because Iran permits other religions. And the only, I published this in Spain and in America, and the only reaction was from Israel. Very nice project, because they've seen somewhere there's a synagogue. Anyway. So that's it. Thank you very much for your patience. Just one last thing. I have a tenuous relation with the man who created this building. Jean Nouvel was responsible, he and his wife, Odile Filion, were the ones who got me my first big project in France, which was a school. And because the local architect misbehaved, Jean Nouvel, in person, did my first building permit in France in 1978. You know, it's very interesting. Because if Jean Nouvel could make such a change from 1978 to 1982, when he built the Centre, I forget the name now, but Arab, Centre Arabe, je sais pas. Maison, Monde Arabe, Institut du Monde Arabe. Then maybe there's a chance to reverse the process. Because he ordered for that building, apparently, the most expensive chairs I have ever designed for an Italian firm. They have 450 chairs in that tower of mine. So, to sum it up, that is inhuman, machine-scale architecture where humans have nothing to do. So it's not just the size, but it's the character, the lack of traditional tectonic logic, where you feel the hand of man and the intelligence of man involved. Because even by reducing those monstrous buildings, it doesn't make it any more human. It's just ugly, repulsive, and creates societies which are exploding, which will become extremely violent. So, you know, there's something in common in Europe. Is the European city was funded on the Egyptian, Persian, Greek, Roman, Christian, and now the modern European city, which is a city which works. The European institutions despise this kind of architecture. That is why every single building built by the European community in Brussels, Luxembourg, or Strasbourg is repulsive. It's like the symbol of a brainless technocracy taking over, being just lobbyists for the big industry, for pharma industry, and so on. And it is therefore where architecture takes such an important role to bring back the human No, the love of people. That buildings have to address people in such a way that they go there not being forced, but because they like it. And that is why people go in the evening during the day to the souk, Wokif. We went there and it was full of people at 10 o'clock at night. Fantastic. It's a machine to produce good civil behavior with children and animals, everything. Colorful, animated, sympathetic, and attractive even to a foreigner. I mean, I remember when I first went to Jeddah with El Wakil, the only pleasant architecture was El Wakil. The architecture which I understood was El Wakil. No, I don't understand a word of all the disgusting buildings built by my English and French friends. So there's hope. And I had a client in Virginia now, and I asked him, why do you come to me? Because there are great planners in America and architects. And he sent me this. That's the reason, that drawing. Instead of accumulating just coins, we accumulate architecture in a meaningful way. And that is what you started doing here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Léon Krier, for your insightful presentation on the importance of reintroducing traditional and indigenous practices of urbanism and architecture in lieu of modern planning practices and governance. So, Mr. Léon Krier, if you could please have a seat. We're actually going to be transitioning into a question and answer session. I'd like to remind our audiences to try and keep their questions short and concise as possible, just so that we can get through as many questions as possible. I guess just to kick off the discussion, I'm going to ask a question of my own, Mr. Léon Krier, if that's okay. So one of the main themes of the presentation that you gave is the importance of traditional architecture and urbanism and the challenges that it faces, right? As a planner myself and as someone who works very closely with building regulations and building codes and what have you, how can planners and regulators such as myself facilitate for traditional architecture and planning practices in the city building process?
Well, you need, when regulations are really against this kind of thing, you need individuals. You need individuals like the Prince of Wales or like the Emir or the Sheikh. I know there are some people here who want this kind. They have already practiced it. And with these people, you need somebody also in administration who wants it. And generally, these people are intelligent and very articulate. And therefore, the rules which don't make sense can be interpreted. And the best thing would be to get rid of the whole planning thing. But that's not possible. Unless is anyone, maybe Fahad is able to do that. But no, when you resist locally, it's impossible. You encounter so many difficulties. It has to come from top. And it has to come either from the President of the United States, and that is, I don't like Trump much, no, but President Trump, had an edict written by Justin Schubo, who is the head of Civic Society, Art Society in Washington, that traditional, in buildings, federal building operations of more than 50 million, they should be preferentially in the classical style. This was written into an edict, and unfortunately, President Trump only made that public in the last week of his presidency. President Biden, in the second week of his presidency, canceled that order, and understanding the importance of this. But I mean, it needs really at the highest, on that level, to take decisions which will then influence to rewrite text. In England, the influence of the Prince of Wales and now the King was absolutely undescribably important. I mean, the fact that he was invited in 1984 to make a speech for the 100th anniversary of the Royal Institute of British Architects, and it was an absolute bomb. When he spoke, for 2 weeks in England, 2-3 weeks in England, everyone spoke about architecture. And everyone agreed with it. I was not even a royalist. I found him in photographs, I didn't find him particularly interesting, or his wife. But when I heard this, I thought, my God, this is really somebody. This is finally a human being talking and resisting against the monster which is growing. So it's individuals. And we had in Dorchester, we had the town architect, who was the district architect. He was completely for this, David Oliver. And there was a politician, John, forget his name, but he was a formidable man. He had even my books. And it was like 3-4 people and the Prince of Wales against the palace, against the administration, against the regional administration, against the government, finally changed it. And now there's the government, in the last few years, there were people in the government who had some things rewritten, that Poundbury would become model. Roger Scruton, who was a famous philosopher, conservative philosopher, became head of the Beauty Commission in London. And it's those, unfortunately, he died early, but there are now other people who are in charge, who are driving in that direction. So I don't think that we will win, but at least we will be able to establish some models like you have here already, however small. In France, it was a summer town, Port Grimaud, built by French architect François Speury, who built a town for people who like boats and cars. And it's a fantastic, 1964 he started, and is an enormous success near Saint-Tropez. So each country needs, in America you have Seaside and many other developments, which are now uncontestably the most valuable places, also real estate-wise. Alice Beach, which is a development designed by DPZ, Tuani and Peter Zyberg, has grown in value so much that people who live there, they can't afford to stay because the inheritors, their sons and daughters, force parents to sell the house because it will make them an enormous rent. So we know these are machines for making value. But then these machines need to be also protected, because otherwise they will be devastated by the machine. It's individuals which count, and you have them here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Léon. I think now we can take a question from the audience, please.
Thank you, Mr. Léon. Thank you for an incredible lecture. As you know, there is a trend in the world right now that is targeting adaptive reuse and repurposing of heritage spaces so that they can continue to thrive, so that heritage elements or traditional vernacular survives longer. Obviously, we're trying to do the same in Qatar. You see it in Wokif and you see it in Lusail. How do we consolidate the rapid growth, the rapid movement in urban planning, trying to be flexible enough to correct ourselves, but also maintain enough of our heritage assets so that the style, the vernacular itself can continue to be used, that the material thrives, that the material remains known to us so we can use it in the future?
Well, I think the most important is to preserve whatever is left and then to reconstruct what can be reconstructed, like this, what is called the Lucille heritage, which was, there was just, was nothing left but the underground foundations. And to have these models and then make them visited. And that creates the appetite and the demand. For instance, in Germany, the reconstructions, I was involved with reconstruction in Germany now for 40 years. In a commission for Dresden, the small town, which is famous, the Florence of the North, it's an unbelievably beautiful town, was in ruined by the war. And in 1990, I was part of a commission of 9 experts, including famous German architects, nine architects, Frei Otto, Mach, very famous people. And there was a commission there of citizens who wanted to rebuild the Frauenkirche, the famous stone dome. And all the experts said, you can't do this, you can't go back into the past, you can't. No. I was the only one to say, this is what should be done. All were against. The administration, the experts. I said, for God's sake, old Dresden is 1/385,000th part of Greater Germany, Großdeutschland. Let them do it. Why not? Try. We have enough disgusting experiments. Why not experiment this? Administration was against. It was done. Then to continue the reconstruction around, there was a single individual who has the same price than Al-Wakil in America, Kulke. He organized, he was an engineer. His mother was a lover. She knew what Dresden was like, and she brought up the child, her son, with the idea of this, what this town was. He then created an initiative. He had a 3D person, digital imagery, done to perfection, how Dresden was. He had an information desk next to the ruins, where there were millions of stones lying about of the old ruin, of the Frauenkirche. Was by now nearing completion. Whenever there was something finished of the Frauenkirche, there was festivities where 70 to 100,000 people would come to set the first stone, to conclude the building site before the dome started. Then when the dome was built, always enormous assemblies against everything. Then when finally the lantern was built, 15-meter high lantern on top of this 100-meter high dome. Then they installed the big bell. When that was lifted, 100,000 people in the square, they played, they gonged, the bell broke. 100,000 people, wow. But imagine the importance of this ceremony. The bell was taken down, recast, and a month later, against 100,000 people. So these are massive social phenomena, binding phenomena which create society. You can't imagine for any one of silly building experiments, whatever they are called. So this traditional architecture talks to everyone. It's a universal language. It's not only bonding people of a certain region, but when I come here, I see the traditional architecture, I get a warm feeling around the heart. When I, as an ex-Catholic, go to Isfahan, I don't need to be explained what this is. I love the traditional the monumental buildings of Isfahan and the simple buildings. When you go to Europe, when you go to Dresden, you will be moved by these new traditional buildings. You don't need an explanation or justification. It's a language which bonds beautiful man-made objects bond humanity into one thing. Beauty is fundamental for creating this bond between and respect between cultures. And therefore, the thing which frightened me most recently was to see these bulldozers, the armed bulldozers, clearing Gaza with people in the ruins. I've never seen anything so despicable in my life, which shows really that we are at the stage where we need to do symbolic buildings which are again create a bonding factor, not only within your society but with other countries, and reciprocal respect and love.
Absolutely. I think we have time for one more question.
It's not really much of a question, but it's really to clarify some of the things that Léon Krier has mentioned. First of all, we talked about the law. In tradition, people broke the human law but respected the law of God. In our modern times, they are afraid of breaking the law of man, although it might be wrong, because they might be fined for it, but they do not care that much as breaking the law of God. And this is the difference between a traditional society and a modern society. As to the laws of the municipality, you asked the question on how we can change this. Before you change anything, you make an inquiry and ask yourself, who made the laws that you are applying now to our city? Who did? Who made them? Do you know? You don't. Why were they made? You don't know. But you have to know that the law that destroyed our cities is the one of the setbacks, because it was based on the ideal of the Palladian villa, which was in the countryside of beautiful Italy. And this Palladian villa started to have less countryside until it became the suburbs. And they called it the suburbs because they were below the urban, which he was demonstrating now as a great town planner. And he made a revolution with his ideas on town planning in England. Before that, if the suburbs were done properly, as he has shown here, they should have been called the super rural, not the sub, because sub is below the urban. They should have been supra-rural, above the rural, making the beautiful landscapes of the city. And the problem which we had, what brought us together in England, was he was attacked because of his ideas on tradition. I was attacked because I was an Arab. And when he got me, recommended me for projects for the London Quadrant, they told him, why get an Arab to do work for us? What does he know about English architecture? And I said, I'm proud to be an Arab because I don't have the arrogance of your colleagues who say, why you get an Egyptian who's been living in England, but they can come to Jeddah, to Qatar and everything, no idea of the desert, no idea of the culture, no idea of the religion, and they impose on us an architecture which we do not understand. So this is the problem we have today. Before we start to say new rules, we have to have an inquiry court. Why are we doing these things? Why do you have those laws? Because the traditional city didn't have setbacks. The whole city, Arab city, was one roof, perforated with courtyards. That's to clarify. I'm sorry, it's not a question, but to make for us clear what he's explaining from this difference between traditional cities and our modern city. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Mr. Al-Wakil for his insightful statement and his powerful answer about trying to question the regulations that have been set in place in our modern planning practices and trying to question them, as well as thank Mr. Léon Krier for his insightful presentation and for his time in order to be here. Unfortunately, we would like to take more questions, but the time does not allow for it. So before we close, we would like to thank all of our distinguished guests for being here today, Mr. Léon Krier for his insightful time, as well as all of our guests for their comments, as well as their questions. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, and we hope to see you at the next one, inshallah.